You wake up tomorrow morning, check your phone, and see a notification that stops your heart. The stock market has disintegrated. A major city has slipped into the ocean. A global war has just been declared. Panic sets in. But then, you realize something even more terrifying. Someone wrote this exact headline down 500 years ago. We are obsessed with the end of the world. We have a morbid fascination with our own destruction. And for centuries, two men have sat on the throne of this obsession. One was a French doctor who gazed into a bowl of water while the plague rotted his city from the inside out. The other was a photographer from Kentucky who fell asleep on a couch and spoke with a voice that wasn't his own. Nostradamus and Edgar Cayce. We are told that these men saw everything. We are told they predicted the rise of Hitler, the collapse of Wall Street, and the tragedy of 9/11 with terrifying accuracy. But what if I told you that the most shocking thing about these prophets isn't what they got right, but the sheer, overwhelming amount of what they got wrong? Today, we are not just reading their horoscopes. We are conducting an autopsy on the most famous predictions in history. We are going to find out if these men were actually tapping into a divine frequency, or if they were just the original masters of the con. Let's start in the 16th century, France, 1503. This is the world of Michel de Nostradamus. You have to understand the atmosphere he was living in. The Inquisition is burning people at the stake for looking at the stars the wrong way. The Black Death is killing your neighbors. It is a time of absolute chaos. In the middle of this nightmare, Nostradamus sits in his study and writes Les Propheties. He produces 942 four-line poems, known as quatrains, but he doesn't write them clearly. He writes them in a code, a thick, muddy soup of French, Latin, Greek, and anagrams. He claims this is to protect himself from the church, to avoid being branded a heretic. But looking back, it looks less like protection and more like a strategy. Because when you write in riddles, you can never be proven wrong. Let's look at the smoking gun. The one prophecy that every Nostradamus believer throws on the table to prove he was the real deal. The death of King Henry II. The verse is incredibly graphic. It says, "The young lion will overcome the older one. He will pierce his eyes through a golden cage. 2 wounds made one, then he dies a cruel death." 4 years after this was written, King Henry II enters a jousting tournament. He faces a younger opponent. A lance shatters. A jagged splinter flies up, punches through the king's gilded visor, the golden cage, and drives into his eye. The king dies a slow, agonizing death. On paper, that is terrifying. It fits perfectly. The young lion, the golden cage, the eye injury. It feels like a direct hit from a time traveler. But here is the detail that the History Channel usually leaves out. This specific interpretation, this perfect link between the poem and the king's death, didn't appear in print until 1614. That is, 55 years after the king was already buried. Nobody in 1559 looked at that poem and said, "Oh my God, he warned us." It was only decades later that scholars went back, dug through the jumble of 900 poems, found one that vaguely fit, and retroactively applied the meaning. It's not prophecy, it's history rewritten to look like magic. Then there is the big one, the one that keeps people up at night. The prediction of Adolf Hitler. The verse reads, "Beasts, ferocious from hunger, will swim across rivers. The greater part of the region will be against the Hister." It sounds just like Hitler. It's one letter off. If you are a believer, this is the moment you drop the mic. Nostradamus named the 20th century's greatest monster by name. 400 years before he was born. Except he didn't. If you open a map of the Roman Empire or a geography textbook from the 1500s, you will find the word hister. It is the Latin name for the Danube River. Nostradamus wasn't talking about a dictator. He was talking about a geographical location. He was describing battles along the banks of the Danube, something that has happened in Europe literally hundreds of times. We see Hitler because we know who Hitler is. We are projecting our own history onto his vague poetry. It's a Rorschach test. We see the monster in the inkblot because we are afraid of the monster, not because the inkblot knows the future. Now, let's jump forward 300 years to a completely different kind of mystic, Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet. Cayce is a much harder puzzle to solve. He wasn't a cryptic poet. He was a simple, devout Christian man from Kentucky. But he had a routine. He would loosen his tie, lie down on a couch, and enter a deep, comatose trance. While in this state, a stenographer would ask him questions, and he would answer. He gave over 14,000 readings, and unlike Nostradamus, Cayce didn't speak in riddles. He spoke in specifics, and this is where it gets uncomfortable for the skeptics, because Cayce has some hits that are genuinely hard to explain away. In 1925, while the rest of America was partying through the roaring 20s, drunk on wealth and optimism, Cayce went into a trance and saw darkness. He warned of a great disturbance in financial circles. Then, just months before Black Tuesday in 1929, he explicitly warned of a bear market. He saw the Great Depression before the economists did. Then there is 1935. The world is at peace. But Cayce goes to sleep and sees the world on fire. He predicts a global alliance of 3 specific nations: the Austrians, the Germans, and the Japanese. He says these 3 will band together. At the time, the Axis powers did not exist. That alliance wasn't formed, yet Cayce identified the exact trio of nations that would plunge the planet into World War II. When you hear that, you want to believe. It feels undeniable. But you have to look at the full picture. You have to look at the misses. And the misses are catastrophic. Cayce didn't just predict wars. He predicted the end of the world as we know it. He gave a specific timeline. He said that between 1958 and 1998, the Earth would undergo a massive physical shift. He said Los Angeles and San Francisco would slide into the ocean. He said Japan would be swallowed by the sea. He said the lost continent of Atlantis would rise from the waves in the Caribbean. Look at your calendar. 1998 has come and gone. Los Angeles is still there. Japan is still there. Atlantis is still a myth. These aren't small errors. These are massive apocalyptic failures. And this exposes the statistical trick behind prophecy. It is the law of large numbers. If I lock you in a room and force you to make 14,000 guesses about the future, you are going to get some of them right purely by accident. If you predict war in Europe every single year, eventually you will be right, because Europe has a history of war. We remember the one time Cayce guessed the Axis powers correctly, and we conveniently delete the thousands of times he predicted super earthquakes that never happened. We cherish the hits, and we ignore the misses. So, are they true? The answer is a hard no. Nostradamus was a master of ambiguity, a man who wrote so vaguely that he could never be wrong. His success rate, when you actually analyze the data, is less than 7%. You could get a better success rate by flipping a coin. Edgar Cayce was a fascinating psychological case study, but his universal consciousness failed the moment he tried to give us a deadline. But the real question isn't about them, it's about us. Why do we click on these videos? Why do we buy the books? Why do we want to believe that a French guy in the 1500s knew about 9/11? Because the alternative is too scary. We want to believe that there is a plan, even if the plan is a disaster, even if the plan is the apocalypse. At least it's a plan. It means someone is driving the car. The idea that history is just a series of random, chaotic events with no script and no driver is terrifying to the human brain. We use prophets like Nostradamus and Cayce as a shield against the chaos. They are our safety blanket. The truth is, nobody knows what happens tomorrow. The future isn't written in a poem, and it isn't waiting for us in a trance. The future is what we make of it right now, while we are awake. If you want to understand more about the psychology of why we believe lies, or if you want us to dissect another historical mystery, hit that subscribe button. We are just getting started digging into the archives. Let me know in the comments. Do you have a personal prophecy story, or do you think it's all just luck? I'll see you in the next one.